Hello, and welcome to this edition of People in Transition. I'm your host, Bob Gerst. I've been hiring and mentoring executives, frontline employees, and job seekers for nearly 40 years through a host of transitions, some difficult, but most very good. This experience has given me a bird's eye view on a variety of trends, economies, industry disruptors, and transitions, big and small. It also brought me into contact with the thought leaders and decision makers you need to meet. Imagine knowing exactly what to do next and how to know it's time to make your big job change. We all know transitions can be scary, but it doesn't have to be. And it's even fun when you have actionable strategies and proven tactics to achieve the future you want. We'll share with you the tools and skills that can take your dreams to your next great job. So if change is on your horizon, you won't want to miss this discussion. Also, please subscribe to this podcast so you won't miss any future episodes. Welcome to this episode of People in Transition. Today, we're thrilled to have Scott Hulderson with us, someone who's committed to equipping us with the tools to unlock our inner potential and clear the obstacles on our path forward. Scott's mission for us today includes three key areas. First, your enhanced agency. By that, I mean understanding where we have control and where we don't. Second, gaining favorable attention. By that, I mean securing the positive spotlight for interviews and promotions. And finally, certainty of fit, using his certified behavioral science and psychology to validate and prove how well you align with your roles and the goals that you have. Scott's impact stretches across 7 time zones, supporting thousands of lives and over 145 businesses. His strength under pressure has deep roots. His first coach, Sensei Chung Kim, taught him the power of instinct and how to stay calm and confident, even in conflict situations. This self-assurance is something Scott now shares with his clients, teaching them unshakable confidence. As a certified expert in human behavior and psychology, Scott brings a precise, science-backed approach to personal and professional success. With a flexible, multidimensional approach, Scott is a dynamic problem solver and strong leader who knows how to drive results. As I said, we're incredibly fortunate to have Scott with us today, and I know his insights on recruiting and interviewing will be invaluable. Please join me in welcoming Scott to our show. Scott, how are you?
I'm fantastic, Bob. Thank you so much for having me. I hope you're also doing great today.
I am as well. Thank you so much. Scott, let's dive right in. I've got a whole host of questions because you have so many unique and useful experiences that I want to make certain that our listeners have a chance to hear what you have to say. First of all, let's take a broader perspective. You've seen a great deal of change in the industry and in recruiting in general over time. Let's use that as our base and think about the future. What are the changes that you think are emerging that people should be aware of as they go about their job search?
Bob, great question. So for me, I guess it started to get really tricky from what I saw in people and in the industry with the pandemic. And for most people equipped with empathy, they went through that trying time. They grew stronger and better with all the time to reflect stuck at home. And a lot of them actually decided they were going to change. We had that thing they called the Great Resignation, where everyone decided, if I don't get what I want now, I could be dead like one of these other coworkers. So we have to keep that in mind, that the management leadership teams, the decision makers, they've been having a very hard time with hiring. It's a very emotional situation anytime you have to separate or hire an employee and onboarding them, obviously. But with so much change, it really started years ago. And so for interacting with recruiters and hiring managers, you have to remember they see a lot of people. And you need to make it easy for them to pick you. You have to be able to have quantifiable results. You have to be able to speak about yourself well when presented a question. How do you behave? What types of work do you like or enjoy the most? Maybe even they're asking, what are your top skills and talents? I know that they want you to be confident in those responses, but you have to try to meter it and not be arrogant, right? I don't mean to take the long way to answer the question, but we need to, as job seekers and adults in transition from one role to another, be able to increase trust factors. And the trust factor might be the first one. That's the most important.
So do you think that that is the most required skill or talent for a person to possess to be successful, that trust factor?
It's the number one skill I would have for anyone is to have the ability to communicate. It may be hard to gain trust if you do not communicate well. Whenever I have misalignments in projects or with partners or clients, it's usually a miscommunication. And for every success that I've ever had, communication was foundationally important for that.
Scott, let's talk some of the things that a candidate might see. First of all, let's talk about an applicant tracking system. Can you describe what that is? You see that on all the social media and newspaper. So describe what it is and how do you navigate the applicant tracking system and the potential challenges that it represents to the candidate.
So the applicant tracking system is mostly going to be looking for key terms and phrases. And a lot of people will scan the job description for what they're applying for, and then they'll rework their resume to try to make sure that they work in those key messages or those keywords. I do think that sounds intense. If you're doing that for every different role that you're applying for, that sounds like a lot of rework. I would recommend, if you're going to take that approach, maybe target 2 or 3 different job descriptions that you want to apply for. And then if you can analyze those job descriptions, and what I have my clients do just in part of our getting to know you section of our relationship, I usually want to ask them if they've done those things or have them remove anything that they've never done so we have a better grasp. I think that it's very important to tell your story, and a lot of job descriptions overlap. And when you're trying to apply with a Goldilocks resume, you may want to get it down from 3 or 4 pages. And if you need to make cuts to get it down for that application, you should start with maybe a CV or a master version of your resume. And then you could tailor and tune that for each application instead of starting over each time.
Scott, how about today we're seeing a lot of verbiage, a lot of talk about AI. Is it something that a job seeker should explore using, or do you think that it is something that should be avoided?
Great question, Bob. For me, the accuracy of the tool that you use, it's very relational, and it correlates to the success that you should expect and maybe the accuracy that it has. Now, I have some great friends that work in AI and they're trying to teach me, but early open source generation, the better way to say it is their accuracy of what they say, since it's still learning, is about 70%. So I'm nervous about using a tool that would be a C- in grade school. And I don't mean to be sarcastic about that, but when I look at AI art, some of them don't spell words particularly well. Some of the people have extra fingers or extra ears, and it's beautiful. And some of the writing for AI, I guess the biggest thing that I've used AI for is writing very compelling cover letters that are very targeted and specific, because they can connect the dots with a formula. But again, it's just a plan. In terms of your resume, I've seen some terrible things happen. So it's a lot of trust to give over to a 70% efficiency user. It will get better, but I would say I use them mostly for cover letters.
Let's stick with that technology, if we could, for a bit and talk about LinkedIn for a while. Give us some of your favorite tips, tricks for success in using LinkedIn for that job seeker.
My favorite tips and tricks for job seekers using LinkedIn I would say my number one thing would be that you use a featured section. If you add a featured section to your LinkedIn profile, you can share recommendations there that you've received. You can share examples of your work. My clients often show personal analytics that show how they behave, what they're motivated by, and what they're best at. But a featured section is an extra section that not a lot of people are utilizing. And you can put samples of your work and articles, and it's like a little billboard. The next thing I would probably say is that's important is to have an about section that describes you as a person. If we're wanting to influence, know, like, trust factors, maybe I want to know, what am I going to catch you doing on your time off? On Sunday, are you playing catch in the backyard? Are you out fishing? Are you watching football? I would want to understand you as a person, because the rest of your LinkedIn profile is all about work. And I really encourage individuals to say at the end of their about section that the best way to contact them is, and maybe an email address, maybe a phone number. However, it's best to get a hold of you. If anyone's looking at that, you should enable them to reach out to you and not have to connect with you or go through the normal channels. And obviously, I'm a stickler for star stories, and I like to include that when we're talking about our work, where we talk about situation, tasks, actions that were took to complete the task, and then ultimately, what are the results? I met with several individuals just this morning that had not ever updated their work content in their experience section. And I had to remind them that the hidden job market's 85% of closure for jobs that are never even listed. And if you're not Google friendly, if you're not SEO searchable for what you do, it's a missed opportunity.
Scott, when you talk about sharing in that featured section a bit more personal, and in the about section as well, describing yourself, can you ever go too far? Can you ever give too much of yourself?
Potentially, and psychology is weird that way because you can't control perception. Obviously, you probably want to keep some opinions to yourself. Anything that would help a person better know what to expect for you, maybe you want to, in the about section, you'd want to talk about maybe some of your key achievements, more of what you'd like to do, what part of your work excites you the most. If I can read about that, if you're not going to post articles or content, at least let me know about you in the about section. So if I wanted to build a relationship with you, it would be easier than just seeing common cliche. And I see a lot of common normal stuff, but the section's pretty important just to personalize yourself. It's your one chance to stand out and say something different than your competition.
And Scott, do you think the battle of which is more important, resume or LinkedIn, how would you fall on that one?
Great question, but I'm going LinkedIn profile all the way. And I say that because I get recruited from my LinkedIn profile. My resume only matters if I apply for a role, but with the hidden job market, people can look at my profile and you see the recommendations, you see what people say, you see service reviews, you see all the different work that they've done. It lets you do decision making with management at a glance. Your resume is maybe a 2 or 3 page marketing document that's optimized to not tell too much, and you pay penalties for room and space, maybe even formatting and detail. But with LinkedIn, it's a 24/7 billboard that doesn't sleep, that anyone can find with Google, and they'll even have recommendations. They'll recommend you to people that network with people like you, or maybe that are in your area. Your resume doesn't reach as many people.
What's the biggest errors that you've seen on LinkedIn profiles?
The biggest one is probably going to be when they have positions for years that they've worked. They have the positions, but they do not have details of the work. That's going to be the number one thing, that if you don't tell anyone what you do, how will they know? How will they know that they need to get you for that solution? So I think you have 1,200 characters that you can use, and maybe that's not the right number, but I ask people, honestly, once we're working on a project, usually after we create the master version of the resume, we want to use it as a force multiplier with the LinkedIn update. And that experience, that triggers all the analytics that push search results back your way.
And do you think that it's important to list what you do or the results that you achieved?
If you read 30 different profiles and they all talked about things that someone did or responsibilities without any results, it would be a very much so what kind of feeling. So I usually lean into the results because the KPIs, the metrics, the indicators of change, those are always the most important part of the story. If you're wanting to build a value added proposition of yourself, please include the results because otherwise we won't know.
You mentioned earlier recommendations on LinkedIn profiles. Do you think they help the job seeker? Do recruiters even look at them? Or is that kind of that voting for the king or queen of the prom and or popularity contest of some kind?
You're not wrong about a popularity contest. I would say that if I go to someone's profile and they have a couple dozen, I think that's great. If they have maybe 100 or a couple hundred, I think that maybe they touch and work with a lot of people. They probably communicate well and they probably deliver results. Do recruiters look at that? Probably not as much about availability or consistency in the work. That, they're probably looking for different things. But like I said about job seekers and those in transition, you can help be trusted if they know more about you and they like the results that you get.
Let's talk about volunteering and the charitable work that a candidate might be doing. Does that help? Does a recruiter look at that, and does it have any value in finding your next great job?
Yes, actually, that's a very great question. And again, perception can be hard to talk about, how someone perceives things. It can be different. But I met with a client this morning and he asked me a question because we reviewed his profile and we just talked about that. And he actually coaches baseball, basketball, and football for youth in his neighborhood, in his town. I think they're ages 6 to 12. He's been doing that for 8 years. And it's not on his profile. And I wouldn't necessarily put it on a resume, except if you wanted to communicate. On my time off, I volunteer to the community. I give back. I'm engaged. I'm involved. It says to me that that person is not lazy. It says to me that they want to be committed and engaged. And if I was looking at it as a recruiter, any volunteering for any cause that means the most to your heart, it is impressive. It is important. A lot of people don't volunteer. So I think that those that give a little extra, they probably deserve a little extra consideration. I know I feel that way.
And let's say that you have graduated, you've got your bachelor's degree, you've maybe even worked some, and now you are in transition. And since graduation, you've taken maybe some additional education, maybe some certification programs. Is that of interest to a recruiter?
Yeah, looking at how people are motivated and what they spend their time on, those that are curious with an ability and a desire to learn are always going to be more easily trainable, more easily able to access new ideas, new thoughts, maybe new innovations or improvements at work. I definitely encourage additional learning and training, development, certification, because your competition might be sleeping on the couch while you're in your office reading for an extra hour. That type of effort does show up. I know when I work with leaders of companies, I'm always surprised at their master's degrees, their secondary education, and the certifications that they've acquired on their journey. It shows demonstrated thought leadership and experience.
In the last 5, 10 years, I think because of COVID and the market, we've seen an increase in shorter tenures of employment. Some call it job hopping. As a recruiter, how does that come across to you? That's question number one. And question number two, how should the candidate address that with the recruiter to put that experience in the best light possible?
Excellent question. What I would say is the way that I would perceive someone that changed jobs rapidly, or maybe as you put it, job hopping, maybe it's perceived that way. I would say that that perception is it hurts the trust to make an offer to this person because they might not be there that long. At least in North America, the cost of a bad hire is about $40,000, right? That's why there's so many rounds of interviews and they spend so much time, money, effort, and manpower trying to make the right decisions. If you make a bad bet and bet on someone that won't be there in another year or 2 years, the costs always hit the bottom line and it hurts the business. Now, for addressing that in a better light, I have some individuals that have wanted change because with their family demands, maybe they have young kids at home and the travel is too much. That's very easy to understand if you can just communicate what was the motivation to change. If you were in a soft, warm nest that was a great opportunity for you, why would you fly the coop and leave for a greener pasture? As long as they can understand that you could be a good fit here, and as long as we manage what's important to you, you'll stay and we won't have to work on a replacement. I think that's always received well, but it does give them questions and they'll usually hit you in the interview for those. So I would like anyone listening to prepare for those talks of transition.
Scott, you mentioned earlier that STAR approach to answering a question, and it certainly can be effective with behavioral type questions. Let's pick a behavior type question and give us an example of that STAR response that you would use.
So I typically would say that STAR stories are great about experience and telling stories relating to your personal behavior. Maybe tell me of a time where you had to manage a challenging project with different types of personalities, maybe different stakeholders. Okay. And so if you can describe the process, maybe you can explain, yes, I've managed adversarial stakeholders that wanted different things out of a project. And when we reviewed the project charter, I gave full thought and mental mind share to each of those individuals to make sure that we could understand what their goals were, document that, agree to the project plan, and work on a plan to bridge that gap and deliver those goals. We did it for a company with 3M. The results, it took about 60 days to implement the Kaizen project, but it was worth $13 million in waste reduction and savings. And it wouldn't have been possible if I couldn't understand the motivations of the stakeholders and the project managers that were helping me deliver the result.
You're hired.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Bob.
Many candidates put themselves under an incredible amount of pressure when they go through an interview. They get nervous. Any thoughts, any coaching that you would give to someone that is approaching that interview that has that issue and how they can cope with that?
Yeah, absolutely, Bob. That's a great question because I think that affects maybe 97% of the population. 97% of the population, they do want to be liked. They do want to be trusted and understood. But they get ahead of themselves. They get nervous about being judged or having it not work out. And I always tell my clients, like, hey, don't sweat until you know that you want to be there, right? This might not be the right opportunity. It might not be the right team. It might not even be for you. You might not like it there. So first go in trying to find out, number one, do I want to work here? And only after they win you over do you allow yourself a chance to get nervous. And then when you are getting nervous about it, maybe you get the jitters halfway through, right? I would want you to stick to your guns, stick to your instincts, because your instincts are usually right, especially if you've already prepared for this. At that point, don't focus on being nervous. Just focus on creating certainty. You've already got their attention. You're already in the interview. Now all you have to do is help them feel secure and trusting you.
Sometimes, for certain positions, you will go through a panel interview, having two or more people as the hiring managers. How do you deal with that panel interview situation, and how can you help come across as the winner that you want to be with that group?
So you know that I take litigious notes. You know that I write things down or I type a lot also while I work. For me, you'll usually know there's going to be a panel ahead of time. You might even have a list of names of these individuals, especially with Fortune 500 companies. In part of your company research, maybe look at some of the leaders there right on LinkedIn and learn more about them. I reduce anxiety and I reduce stress by taking action and by doing my homework. So I do research on the individuals that I'm going to meet if I'm able to, and I want to be able to connect with them. Maybe if I'm going to have questions at the end, which I think are important for an interview, maybe the position or title of the person that's on the team might direct some of your focus about if this is a director that you're going to be reporting to. Maybe ask them some of your most important questions and let them know that this is serious for you. It's not just a job. This is your next career move. And if you can show that you've done research, you're prepared, you can communicate. I do take notes of everyone in the room and I draw them. If there's 4 or 5 people, I will draw them on my notepad with their names. And I'll usually have questions outlined for them specifically, depending on what they do and who they are.
Scott, I'm seeing an increase in the use of psychometric testing tools for candidates. And I know that this is something that you're particularly comfortable with. Can you describe to our listeners who might be candidates, if they are confronted with one of these tools, how they should view it and how best they can get through that process?
Yeah, so great question. And in terms of perception of what it is, some people think of it as testing and they get nerves about it, they get anxious. And psychometric testing, for the most part, as we would call it, they're assessments. And because they're assessments, they don't have necessarily wrong answers unless you're being untruthful. Okay, so if someone asks you to take a psychometric test, this is going to be components usually based in what drives your behavior or your why, what your behavioral style looks like when represented, right? They might be able to see who you are naturally when you're not thinking about it. They'll also be able to see who you are when you know people are watching you and when you know you're being observed. They'll see your 2 styles. And that will allow them to understand the type of team that you would fit into, what kind of strengths you bring. Maybe they're even looking at what motivates your work and what types of passions you have. For me, I also look at demotivators. Demotivators are natural. Not everyone has them, but out of 7 values, I'm never going to be good at. Maybe regulatory is a demotivator for me. That is my personal one, where I don't want to be overly rigid. I would rather be flexible and be able to adapt to change instead of getting sabotaged every time something unexpected happens. The last type of tool that you can, and there are different brands out there, they look at different things, but they usually want to know what's your style like and what motivates you. There's other tools that might look at skills and in what order you think. And in what order you think is important, because I've got clients that can see the big picture all day, but they might struggle when it comes to empathy and communication with others because they're so practical and bottom line oriented. They're only seeing practical thinking, which is getting results and performance, and maybe they're seeing the big picture. And then there are those people, sometimes if they're people first individuals, they're all about the connections, the relationships, and the team. They forget sight of the bottom line. They don't see the big picture and the connections of things. It depends on what your team needs as for balance. The best teams are made of people that are completely different and they all stand on different bases. And that's usually what psychometric testing is about. It's about understanding the software, like the instructions for your mind software. It usually comes in those reports. And I know that when I consult with them, companies usually want to know, out of these 10 candidates, who wants the job the most, who would perform it best, and why. Please support your answer. And then there's key pieces of information that I would be looking for. And it's a way to know someone beyond what they can tell you. If you had to answer every interview question like, I think I would be a good fit, or I feel I could do this job well, instead of knowing why you would be a good fit, what you demonstrate, and what are the top talents to trust you with. When you know it for certain, it just changes the entire dynamic.
Scott, are there any books or other resources that you would recommend to someone who's going through their own job search?
For me, I kind of work in psychology a lot. I haven't read any great books lately. I've been kind of nose to the grindstone for the last 2 or so years. Start with Why is a pretty great resource. That's by Simon Sinek. And I recommend it because, as you stated at the first outset of this meeting, agency is very important to know where you're in and know where you're out. And if you start with your why, it means that you can see your own personal true north so much faster. And you can run that direction at full speed, and you never have to worry about going the wrong way, so you can give it everything you have.
Scott, we've gone through so many great points, so much useful, actionable ideas. If our listeners remember and take away only 2 or 3 things, what would those 2 or 3 things be?
2 or 3 things that I would recommend for every job seeker to pull from this is 1, update your LinkedIn profile. Look at all the different sections you can add. Think about the story that you're telling. Think of it as a 24/7 billboard. Put your projects in there. Put your results in there. Put your education and training, awards. Put your volunteering in there. Tell your story on your LinkedIn profile. One thing that I would want individuals to be aware of, like with resumes, the hardest thing about a resume is there's not just one right way to do it, but there is a collection of best practices. And you can align to those best practices and you can win, but the resume will not be as important as your LinkedIn profile. If you're trying to impress recruiters or let them know that you're personable, you can be part of the team, maybe reach out to former coworkers that you really enjoyed working with. Maybe you reach out to them and ask, hey, Bob, I really enjoyed your work in psychology and your background in personal development with professional leaders and executives. I'd love to write you a recommendation about all I learned working with you. Would it be okay if maybe we exchanged recommendations and you did the same for me if you enjoyed working with me? And the reason I would want you to get recommendations is it's just like references that you don't have to put on a call list. They can see instantly what someone thinks about you. And maybe if you have enough people say the right thing, you'll influence that know, like, trust factor even more.
Scott, I can see how you have supported thousands of lives and hundreds of businesses in your career. Your thought process, your experiences, your ideas are so useful. Thank you so much for all of our listeners for your help today. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, Bob. Thank you so much for having me. It was a blast.
Thank you for listening. We're working in unprecedented times. The purpose of these episodes is to give you the support and critical tools to adjust with the changing marketplace. I'll continue to introduce you to guests who have successfully survived their own obstacle course and can share useful information. If today's message was helpful to you, please share it on your social media. Your review and rating helps get this to more people. Also, if you have questions or podcast ideas for future conversations, reach out to me on LinkedIn. Change is constant. The more prepared you are for it, the better and easier the change will occur. Thank you again. This is your host, Bob Gerst. See you at our next episode.